Good afternoon, class. Welcome to our monthly meeting for CL 126 with a descriptive title, Creative Writing. Hi, I am your teacher for this afternoon and you can call me Teacher FEAJHAY. I just want you to know, students, that at the end of this discussion, you should be able to understand the importance of creative constraints in the acquisition and application of creativity as a 21st century skill. Second, you should be able to write your original creative compositions that depicts the objects that can be found in your surroundings or in your homes. And at last, students, you should be able to participate in the activities prepared by your teacher to exemplify one's potential of being creative. And before we proceed to our formal discussion, I have with me a piece of paper. Okay? Because I want you to ask this question. With just a piece of paper, what things you can do or form from this piece of paper? Okay, very good. Sometimes we can form a paper plane, a paper crane, and a paper boat with just a piece of paper. Very good, class. Now, I want you to ask these questions to yourself. So, how did you come up with those objects just by looking at a piece of paper? Very good. Now, based from the mentioned words imagination and creation, what skill is the focus of this discussion? Very good. It is creativity. And last, coining that skill with our subject, writing, what do you think is our topic for today? Very good, class. It is creative writing. So before we proceed on what is creative writing, I want you students to watch a video about creativity and understand what is creativity.
When you hear the word creative, you might think of a painter, or a playwright, or an author, or a photographer, or a filmmaker, or a chef. In other words, you might think of people who make things. I think it's what we mean when we use a label like creative type. But there's no such thing as creative type. We are all creative, every one of us. We just need a bigger definition of creativity. Yes, creativity involves making things, but it can also mean mashing up ideas in innovative ways. It can mean thinking differently about data and finding unique solutions to practical problems. It can mean hacking systems and tweaking things in unusual ways. It can mean exploring ideas and navigating information until you become an expert curator. It can mean designing systems that empower the creative work of others. It can mean creating change in the world by speaking truth and leading movements and interacting with people. See, each of these creative approaches shape our world in profound ways. And the more we see the creativity all around us, the more we are able to appreciate the creativity inside ourselves.
You have watched a video about creativity. Let's now discuss creativity. So creativity is the capability of the brain to think more eventually than what the human mind can perceive. It deals with subjectivity and emotion. So all of us can be creative, it's just we will have a broader definition of what is creativity. Okay, so as we use creativity in writing, we have now creative writing. So creative writing has been defined as the writing that expresses ideas and thoughts in an imaginative way, but it does not absolutely suggest that the content such as ideas and thoughts are unrealistic. Instead, imaginative way pertains to the way of expressing these thoughts. So creative writing has three forms. First is poetry. So poetry is written in verse or lines that composes a stanza. So it uses literary devices such as metaphor, imagery, and other figurative language. Second type of creative writing is that fiction. So fiction is a prose writing that tells a story. It can be in the form of a short story, a novella, and a novel. And the last form of creative writing is creative nonfiction. So creative nonfiction is a writing based on facts, but it is presented in a more personal and emotionally stirring manner. So experts said that we have constraints in using creativity, and they call it creative constraints. So creative constraints are constraints that are not considered as boundaries of creativity, but the foundation of it. So these constraints will try to push us to our limits until we can find new things to create based on the things that we have. So constraints are our limitations of what we can do for a short particular moment. But as we expose ourselves to limited options, we surprisingly generate more and more from what we have, which is being creative. So constraints create an environment that demands that we unleash untapped ideas, which fuels innovation. Now let's have an individual activity, and I call this activity as audio mapping. So I want you students to listen attentively to the converted audio file, and after listening it, I want you to create a concept map within 5 minutes about the possible key points of the power of creative constraints using a photo editing or graphic organizer maker application installed on your phone. Now, 5 minutes starts now.
Imagine you're asked to invent something new. It could be whatever you want, made from anything you choose, in any shape or size. That kind of creative freedom sounds so liberating, doesn't it? Or does it? If you're like most people, you'd probably be paralyzed by this task. Without more guidance, where would you even begin? As it turns out, boundless freedom isn't always helpful. In reality, any project is restricted by many factors, such as the cost, what materials you have at your disposal, and unbreakable laws of physics. These factors are called creative constraints, and they're the requirements and limitations we have to address in order to accomplish a goal. Creative constraints apply across professions to architects and artists, writers, engineers, and scientists. In many fields, constraints play a special role as drivers of discovery and invention. During the scientific process in particular, constraints are an essential part of experimental design. For instance, a scientist studying a new virus would consider, how can I use the tools and techniques at hand to create an experiment that tells me how this virus infects the body's cells? And what are the limits of my knowledge that prevent me from understanding this new viral pathway? In engineering, constraints have us apply our scientific discoveries to invent something new and useful. Take, for example, the landers Viking 1 and 2, which relied on thrusters to arrive safely on the surface of Mars. The problem? Those thrusters left foreign chemicals on the ground, contaminating soil samples. So a new constraint was introduced. How can we land a probe on Mars without introducing chemicals from Earth? The next Pathfinder mission used an airbag system to allow the rover to bounce and roll to a halt without burning contaminating fuel. Years later, we wanted to send a much larger rover, Curiosity. However, it was too large for the airbag design, so another constraint was defined. How can we land a large rover while still keeping rocket fuel away from the Martian soil? In response, engineers had a wild idea. They'd design a sky crane. Similar to the claw machine at toy stores, it would lower the rover from high above the surface. With each invention, the engineers demonstrated an essential habit of scientific thinking, that solutions must recognize the limitations of current technology in order to advance it. Sometimes this progress is iterative, as in, how can I make a better parachute to land my rover? And sometimes it's innovative, like how to reach our goal when the best possible parachute isn't going to work. In both cases, the constraints guide decision-making to ensure we reach each objective. Here's another Mars problem yet to be solved. Say we want to send astronauts who will need water. They'd rely on a filtration system that keeps the water very clean and enables 100% recovery. Those are some pretty tough constraints, and we may not have the technology for it now. But in the process of trying to meet these objectives, we might discover other applications of any inventions that result. Building an innovative water filtration system could provide a solution for farmers working in drought-stricken regions, or a way to clean municipal water in polluted cities. In fact, many scientific advances have occurred when serendipitous failures in one field address the constraints of another. When scientist Alexander Fleming mistakenly contaminated a petri dish in the lab, it led to the discovery of the first antibiotic, penicillin. The same is true of synthetic dye, plastic, and gunpowder. All were created mistakenly, but went on to address the constraints of other problems. Understanding constraints guides scientific progress, and what's true in science is also true in many other fields. Constraints aren't the boundaries of creativity, but the foundation of it.
Okay, class, based from our discussions and activities for today, what reflections can you form? Very good. Sometimes, we need to have a broader definition of what is creativity, because all of us are creative if only we will try to nourish what we have. Any other? Very good. With the advent of technology, we can showcase our creativity just like making concept maps using our phones. And last, very good. Sometimes our constraints should be considered as our foundation in developing creativity skill. And that's all for today's online discussion, and I hope to see you in our next meeting. Goodbye, class. Class dismissed.